So I want to give you as much easily and immediately usable information as possible. So I'm going to try not to give you too many specifics that you have to think too hard about, and I want to give you as many things as you can do while you're working or in quick little breaks while you're working that can be helpful for hands, wrists, arms, shoulders, neck, back, the things that tend to get the tightest when we're working. So we'll start with the most obvious: neck, hands, wrists, shoulders. So just really simple neck stretches, dropping the chin down to the chest, letting the back of the neck relax, and starting to become aware of places where you hold tension in your body kind of habitually, what your habit is in how you're working, whether your shoulders are up around your ears. This is probably the most common thing, not just for potters, but for humans. So starting to think about letting the shoulders relax down, thinking about length between the neck or the shoulders and the ears, and then lifting the chin, looking up towards the ceiling. I like to think about lifting the head up off of the neck, almost like you're creating an imaginary traction for yourself. And whether your teeth are closed, your jaw is closed, or open is going to change how much stretch you get through the front of the neck and the throat and the upper chest. You can even use a hand right at the top of the sternum, kind of below your collarbones. Two hands works really nice. This is a really great stretch. Kind of pulling the skin down, and you can move your head around and explore tension there. So I'm really thinking about what's happening on the front here. And then if you want to go to the side, letting one ear drop to the shoulder, letting that shoulder relax down, opposite shoulder relax down. And you can do this for just a quick stretch, 5-10 seconds, or 30 seconds, or 60 seconds. And then bringing the head up and dropping the opposite ear to the opposite shoulder. And I'm just letting the arms hang so that the shoulders hang heavy. So if you're seated doing this, you might find yourself resting your arms in your lap or on the arms of your chair. See if you can allow the arms to relax down so that you actually get a little bit more length on the sides of the neck. Go ahead and bring your head back up. And for a lot of us, we end up pushing the face forward. So we're working, you could be at the computer or doing your craft, pushing the face out in front. So we talk about head ramping. And so I like to think of it as just sliding the face back. And you're thinking about lengthening the back of the neck. So when the head goes forward, look at what this looks like. When the head goes forward, it's a shorter distance between the base of my skull and the base of my neck or the upper shoulders. And when you slide the head back, we end up getting all that length back. So for those of us who have kind of worked ourselves into this position where the upper spine is curled forward and the cervical spine or the neck is curled backwards, we can work on starting to undo that just by thinking of making the back of the neck long. So while you're working, you can think of sliding your face back. That's a good one. I know we're always trying to get in close to our work, but also while you're stretching. So even doing that side bend with the head again, if you want to think of sliding your face back while you do that, and then go ahead and come back up to center and do the other side, slide the face back. So you're going to feel a little bit, maybe different location of the stretch when you do that head ramp or slide the head back. All right, go ahead and come back up. Okay, so these might seem obvious, but if you haven't done them, if you're not really practiced at doing them, they might not seem so obvious. So in addition to side, up and down, we can turn the head to one side. So of course, these are all things that you can do while you're working, right? You can just take a quick 5-second, 10-second, 60-second break just to move your head around. It doesn't have to be anything special, anything hard. Just turning your face from one side to the other. This will help you in all areas of your life, like being able to check your blind spot when you're backing out of a parking space. And again, it doesn't have to be anything fancy or anything hard. Trying to keep it simple here. So in addition to just moving the head around, you can add the arms. So you can take one arm out to the side, think about bringing that palm up, reaching the arm away, keeping in mind what's happening with the shoulder. So dropping that shoulder down. I've got my palm up. I'm gonna scooch over a little bit. You can actually extend the wrist to bring this down into the hand. Extend the fingers. So think of straightening all your fingers out, dropping the fingernails towards the floor, maybe even starting to straighten out the elbow. You can also maximize your time and do this both sides at the same time and just increase the one side by dropping one ear to the shoulder. This can be done out to the side. This can be done palm up. This can also be done palms down. I really like this one. So if you take your index finger and thumb and make like the OK sign, and then take the hands, doesn't really matter where your hands are, but they can go out to the side. I'm going to drop them here just so you can see what's happening with the wrists. So a nice flexion of the wrist or bending down of the wrist with the fingers in that OK sign. Whoo, good stretch through the hand and the forearm. Might feel it through the thumbs. Your hands might tingle. Drop those shoulders down. All right, go ahead and relax that. So let's go through a few more hand and wrist and finger stretches. So if you happen to be in front of a table, I'm going to do this just my hands. I'm not going to use a table to do this right now. But if you happen to be in front of a table, you can do a lot of this stuff two hands at the same time and use the table to manipulate how your hands are moving. But just real quick, you can take the palm facing forward, take the other hand and pull those fingers back. So from the side, you're trying to pull the fingers back right along the line of the forearm and in line with the forearm, and you're trying to get to a 90-degree angle at the wrist. If you've been spending a lot of time in this position doing work with your hands, the flexors on the bottom side or the front side of your hand and forearm can be really tight. So opening those up, going the opposite direction can be really, really helpful. And you can do these finger stretches one finger at a time. You can do them two fingers at a time. You can vary up how you're manipulating the fingers, which ones you're using, opposites, evens and odds, any of that stuff. And then you can go the opposite direction, kind of like what we just did with our OK sign, using the hand to pull the fingers down and then pull those fingers back along the line of the forearm. So we get that really nice stretch across the forearm, back of the wrist, back of the hand, and back of the fingers. Oh, such a good one. We don't have a ton of stretches that we do for the thumbs, but those guys can get pretty overworked in doing this kind of activity. So if you think about like you're going to shake somebody's hand, grabbing a hold of the thumb like it's a joystick, like you're playing video games now, and you're going to pull the thumb right back along the line of the forearm. I like to keep the fingers closed and drop the fingers away from the thumb. So we're not moving at the wrist, just moving kind of at that webbing between the thumb and the index finger. So that's a really nice one for the thumb. And then you can also take the thumb across the finger, like I can't even straighten out my fingers. The thumb across the hand, like you're trying to touch the base of the pinky. Oh, that's a good one. And open that up. You do that a few times. Woo, woo, good stuff in there. Of course, you would do that on two hands. So if you were doing this with a table, you could just put all 8 of your fingertips on the table and do that same hand stretch, but the table would be doing the holding of the fingertips for you, so you could get that, maximize your time there. So a couple more for the shoulders. You can just do basic shoulder rolls, right? Rolling the shoulders forward. So in thinking about the shoulder, I don't know how you think about it, but I tend to think about the shoulder as like, this is my shoulder. But this is the arm bone, the humerus, and the shoulder joint is where it connects to your shoulder blade. So you've got your shoulder joint, and then you've got your scapula, your shoulder blade. So your scapula moves around on the backside of your rib cage, and your arm should move at the shoulder joint. But for a lot of us, it's kind of sticky at that joint. So when we move our arm around, we're moving the whole entire scapula with it. So doing these shoulder rolls can help to loosen some stuff up around the shoulder blades, the scapula, around the shoulder joints, which is your glenohumeral joint, and also help to maybe loosen up the traps a little bit. For a lot of us that have that habit of lifting the shoulders when you're thinking hard, concentrating, working out in front of you, the trapezius can get really tight. So just doing these shoulder rolls forward and back can also be one of those things that you can do while you're working. Just take a quick 5-second, 10-second break to do some shoulder rolls, just to get your body to move for a second while you're doing your work, right? We tend to get really involved and then just find ourselves not moving for a long period of time. So just trying to find ways that you can add in some things where you don't have to wash your hands, you don't have to go get any equipment. For a lot of this, you don't even have to stand up, but periodically stand up as well if you're working in a seated position. So also doing some side stretches, so you can reach up and get a nice stretch through the rib cage and through the waist, the back. You can do this seated, you can do it standing. Again, it doesn't have to be anything special. You can just reach up and stretch the side of your body. You can also reach across your body. If your hands are dirty, you might not want to do it this way, but you can do this. You can give yourself a big hug and then clay on your back, right? And you can do it both ways, crossing the arms. Okay, a couple more things that you can do while you're working from a seated position. You can do really easy twists. Right, again, it doesn't have to be anything special. You don't have to use your hands to like reach back and grab onto something and yank yourself around, using your twisting muscles to twist your body, just to get out of that stiff position. If you find yourself in this forward flexed position where your spine is bent forward, just going the opposite direction, just extending the spine. So this might be a good place to talk about or remind ourselves of neutral ribs and neutral pelvis. Okay, so from your seated position, so we talked about neutral ribs and neutral pelvis just a little bit, but from your seated position, if you think about where your rib cage is in relation to your pelvis, so rather than thinking about in relation to the floor, we're going to think about our parts in relation to each other, because you're going to be moving around. You may not be sitting in a perfectly upright position. Highly unlikely that you are, right? So as you're sitting, you want to be sitting on your sit bones. So we saw, or we will see in the video, sitting at the wheel. When we're sitting on our sit bones in an upright position, your pelvis will be vertical and your rib cage will be vertical. But if we're taking this forward, we want to think about moving from the hip joint. So if you think about where your sit bones are, you're going to actually roll forward on your sit bones, and then your rib cage and your pelvis can still be neutral to each other. So a couple of things that can happen here alternatively is that we lean forward and we bend from the spine. So that's not going to be great for a lot of things if you spend a lot of time in this position. So we want to think about moving from the hip joints and keeping those parts pretty relative to each other. And we also want to avoid this. So you see how that rib cage gets pressed forward, and that ends up putting a lot of pressure in the low back and the mid back. So again, over time, as you're trying to let your pelvis tip forward, this is not going to feel good on your low back. So if you think about letting that rib cage drop down a little bit, it's actually going to give you more core support. So even as you're working and your elbows are braced against your body or braced against your legs, that actually gives you a little bit more support to be in that position, okay? And then as we saw in the video, it was really helpful to have something to sit on. So this is black against my black clothes and my black stool. So if we have something to sit on that allows us to easily roll the pelvis forward, and it doesn't have to be anything special. So we just rolled up a towel and stuck that on the chair, and then what that does is it gives you a little bit of a guide to think about rolling the pelvis forward. So it's a reminder, you can feel it, it's a tactile cue, and it helps to physically roll the pelvis forward. So it makes it a little bit easier to keep yourself on the sit bones and to remind yourself to hinge at the hips. So let's talk about hip hinging. So there's a lot of movement and static position when you're in a standing position up on your feet. So when we are bending forward, you have the option to bend forward by hinging at the hips, by leaning forward from the spine. So this means that your back muscles and the little tiny joints in your spine, your vertebral joints, have to do a lot of work here. This is actually a really weak place for your spine. So it leaves us more prone to injury, especially when you add weight to it. If you're lifting something up, or you add time to it, if you're spending a lot of time in this position, working over a table. So if you get into the habit of hinging at the hips, your butt goes backwards and your spine pretty much stays in its neutral position. Again, just like from that seated position, it gives us the opportunity to actually use the abdominal muscles to support the spine. So it's really easy to get in this habit of bending forward from the spine, and you may already be in that habit from doing it that way for years. And the tighter the muscles on the back sides of the legs are, the harder it is to hinge at the hips. So if you want to think about the hip creases, I like to put my hands, put my pinkies right in the hip creases if you want to stand up and try this. And as you hinge forward, as your pelvis tips forward, you'll kind of pinch your pinkies in between the upper and lower part of the hip there, right in that hip crease. So that's hip hinging. And if you want to think about it as taking it down lower, below the hips, when you bend forward to pick something up, you can also add a knee bend to that. So that gives you a little bit more support. Your quads can do a little bit of work. Your butt goes backwards, so you've got your glutes available to help you, and your abdominals are in a position to actually do some support, do some work to support your spine as well. So when you go to pick up something heavy, like a big bag of clay or a bucket of glaze, that you actually have more support and more ability to do that. So when you go to lift up that heavy thing, you now have big muscles on your backside to use to lift those up, and you're not just using your back to lift them up. So that can be a pretty compromising position for your spine. So I will show you some things that this is going to be more like the corrective or restorative portion of the exercises. So we've got a section of stuff you can do in studio, stuff you can do while you're working, stuff you can do with your hands dirty, stuff you can do that you don't really need a lot of equipment for. So this will be the things you can do maybe in studio during a break when you've washed your hands, something you might be able to do after you get home to do some restorative or corrective exercises. So the first one is the calf stretch, and we do a very specific calf stretch, and I'm going to run through these pretty quickly just in the interest of time for this presentation, but I want to make this video available to you so you can go back and rewatch, you can go back and pause. And then I will also try to do all of the exercises in a longer format that you can actually follow along with and maybe do like a 7-minute routine for you. So calf stretch, we usually use a half foam roller. So this is about 3 inches high. It's a pretty firm foam, so it doesn't compress very much, but you can use a rolled up towel or really anything that will elevate the ball of your foot, keep your heel on the ground, and keep your knee straight. So this is a really great stretch to undo all of the sitting time, and especially if you find yourself sitting with your heel elevated, because that's going to shorten these muscles a little bit more. And of course, you're going to do both sides, but I'm going to run through these kind of quickly. So that's a calf stretch. The second is the double calf stretch. We call it the double calf stretch, but it's really like the double everything up the backs of the legs stretch. So again, great for undoing all of that sitting time. So this can be done with the balls of the feet elevated or the feet flat on the ground. So if you're really tight in the backs of your legs, you might find it's easier to start with the feet flat. So I'll show you that first. So we talk about that hip hinge. So you're going to do that hip hinge here. You're going to place your hands on a chair or a table or a desk. And as you're going forward, your tailbone is going up. So tail goes up. We're still going to keep our lumbar curve here. So if I'm really tight down the backs of the legs and I find myself kind of flattening my back, I'm going to come up a little bit higher so that I can still keep that neutral spine. And then adding in the foot elevation just adds in a little bit more length for the backs of the legs, so that takes it a little bit deeper into the calf muscles of the lower legs. So that's your double calf stretch. Calf stretch, double calf stretch. The next one is going to be the top of the foot stretch. This one can be done seated, and depending on what kind of shoes you wear to do your work, you may find that you can do this as one of the exercises that you can do in studio. But if you're wearing stiff-soled shoes, or you're wearing regular tennis shoes or something like that, it's going to be a little bit harder. This will be easier done barefoot or in socks. And standing, you can always hold on to something for stability. I don't like to use the word balance here because that's not balance if you're holding on to something, but to keep yourself from falling over, you're reaching back, tucking the toes under, and then you're going to straighten out your front leg and bring the weight back into the heel. So indeed, we are putting some weight onto the stretching foot. And then again, of course, you're going to do that on both sides. If you want to do it seated, it works well to do it on a stool that has some height to it rather than a regular chair height chair or stool. So you're basically doing the same thing, but that way you don't have to be standing for it. So this might be a good option to do in studio. Or if you have balance issues, and seated is going to be better for you. This is a great way to do this particular stretch also. And then you do it on both sides because it feels really good. So I'm going to show you two. We talked about doing some twists as kind of those mini breaks while you're working. So just kind of twisting in your chair. But if you've got clean hands and you can actually use your hands to assist with the twist, you can twist and give yourself a little bit of help with the hands. I don't like to really yank the spine around. I don't think it's really great for the spinal discs. But as you're twisting, you can use the hands to help hold the position. And you're keeping your spine pretty neutral, pretty straight up and down here. So, of course, you can do that both directions. And I think I did this in the studio portion of this, but you can also do a side stretch, standing, or seated. And then a really great spine stretch, we call it the thoracic stretch. And I just always find it interesting. I'm not a natural mover, but like you just move, right? Your body, we're animals, and animals move. Cat wakes up in the morning, dog wakes up in the morning, they stretch. So we end up, despite our best efforts, probably in this position a lot with the spine curled forward. So to try to undo that a little bit, you're going to come into a position really similar to that double calf stretch, this forward bent position. Hands can be on a table. They can even be up higher, so they can be on a counter, maybe even a wall. But it's not about what's happening with the legs. So it's okay if the knees are bent here. It's what's happening with the spine. So we're going to let the spine sink down into that space. Actually, I like to have my hands up a little bit higher for this one. Let's go here. So this ends up being a stretch down under the arms, down the sides of the back, and then for the spine. So you can see where my spine is here. If you imagine a hand gently pressing down in between your shoulder blades, that's what you're trying to go for there. It feels amazing, as it probably looks like, and you can try this while you're watching this also. And then you can also let the head drop in between the arms, letting the back of the neck relax. Ah, that's awesome. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple for the lower body. So we did the calf stretch, we did the double calf stretch, but this is for the hips. So we spend a lot of time in this 90-degree hip position, and sometimes even greater than that, right? If your stool is lower and you're sitting at the wheel, for example. So this is a great one for opening up the fronts of the hips, kind of across the hip crease, hip flexors, and the psoas. If you're not familiar with your psoas, go look it up. It's an amazing muscle. This is really great to do elevated. So if you have a step that you can stand on, a block of wood, a book, you don't have to be up high, but just to get the other foot up off the ground, and you're just going to swing the leg back and forth. So again, you can hold on to a chair or a wall or a table for this, but just gently swinging that leg back and forth, just to help open up the front of the hip and up into the psoas. From the side, let me do this side so I can do the other leg. So from the side, it's just the leg that's moving. So the leg is swinging forward and back. It's not a whole spine movement. So pelvis stays stationary and the rib cage stays stationary, which is another reason why it's helpful to hold on while you're doing that. So that's a really nice one just to get those hips to release. So if you've got hip issues, that's a really great one. Okay, so a couple more for the shoulders and a couple more for the hips. So that standing leg swing is great for opening up the hips, but you can also do a standing lunge. You can do this kneeling. You can actually get down onto the floor, placing the knee on a pillow or something like that, but you don't have to. So I know I want to, like I said at the beginning, I want to give you as much usable information as possible. So you can do this in a standing position. You can hold on for this one as well. This doesn't have to be a balance exercise, but we're opening up the front of the hip here. So I've got my back heel up off of the floor, front knee is bent. I'm not too far forward with the front knee. And then where my pelvis is right now is pointed towards the corner. So you want to square up your pelvis to the direction that you are facing so that we actually get this opening across the front of the hip. You can set this heel down and get a stretch in the calf back there. Like I keep saying, it doesn't have to be really specific. It doesn't have to be really complicated. Keep it simple. Just try to find ways to stretch the parts that find themselves in a locked position for a really long time, or the parts that hurt. If you're finding yourself going this direction with your spine, go the opposite direction with your spine. So here's a great shoulder exercise for that. So you're going to reach, it's called the posterior arm reach, and you're going to reach your arm back behind your back, and you're going to place it across your back. So you can start with the arm parallel to the ground, and this might be plenty. It might even be more than what your shoulder can do. It depends on what you've got going on in your shoulder. So if this hurts, if it pinches, sends shooting pains up your neck, pause this one. Hold on to this one for later. But if you're okay here, this is a great starting place. The progression of this would be flipping the palm over. The progression would also be starting to work the hand up the back. But all the while that you're doing this, your clue as to whether you can move on to the next step is this arm still straight up and down? Is your elbow underneath your shoulder? So if you start bending the elbow and bringing the hand up higher and you find the elbow popping out to the side, you're going to bring your hand back down so you can get the arm back against the body. So, and of course you'll do that on both sides. You go nice and slow coming out of it, because this is a pretty intense stretch. You're coming into an internally rotated position, working the arm back behind the body. So even just getting into that is a great shoulder stretch. So if you find you can't actually do it, working through the steps of getting to it could be a good thing. Posterior block fold or whatever. This can be anything, but you want it to be something that is wider rather than narrower. So this is about 12 inches long. Narrower than this or narrower than the width of your shoulders is probably going to be less desirable. You're going to want something longer. You can do it with a broomstick, you can do it with a strap, a belt. But basically you're just going to put this object behind you, hold it between your palms, not between your fingers, but between your palms, and you're going to squeeze the palms together and try to lift that object up off your rear end. Mine don't go very far. I've got pretty tight shoulders. You might find that you do as well. Tight chest and tight shoulders are going to limit this, but that means we need this more. So this is a really great one for working on strength on the back side to balance all that tension on the front side. Okay, one more. So you're going to pretend that this is a wall behind me. And you can always do this with a fake wall. You can always have an imaginary wall behind you. Wherever you are, you can always have an imaginary wall. It won't always hold you up, but you can use it for your exercises. So we're going to do wall angels. So this can be done laying on the floor on your back, preferably bolstered up, maybe lying on a pillow, lying on a rolled up blanket. But this is great for opening up the shoulders and the chest. And if you have an actual wall, if this were an actual wall, I wouldn't be able to get my wrists against the wall without pulling my shoulder blades together. So that's not actually getting me the stretch that we want in the chest. So you want to keep your shoulder blades kind of wide, which might mean your wrists don't end up against the wall. That's okay. You're still working them back as you're going up and down, just like you're making snow angels against the wall. But we talked about that rib cage and pelvis position earlier. So we want to keep the ribs down as the arms come up. The alternative would look like this. which again is not actually getting us the stretch we want in the shoulders, it's getting us movement in the spine. So you want to keep your ribs down or your sternum down as you're doing this one. So this is another great chest and shoulder opener.